Last spring, a daring and intrepid band of members of our congregation spent countless hours combing through our building here, room by painstaking room, carefully preserving the valuable historical records while hauling decades of accumulated clutter out into dumpster after dumpster. They were battling against what I think is a common church affliction, an ailment that I hope I won't offend anyone too badly if I call with compassion trapped in the past-itis. This very common and sometimes deadly congregational diagnosis, sometimes deadly, includes such symptoms as Ted's grandchild put it to him as they worked on cleaning the building together one day, and which Ted has generously shared at a number of meetings since. This place smells old. It was a diagnosis that a member who will remain anonymous implied in the first few months that I was here as we poked our head around the building, taking stock of all that might need doing, tallying all the deferred maintenance needs that might need to be addressed if we took on the project of making some capital improvements. And we were imagining what a young visitor to the church would notice, and this person quipped to me, well, yes, it could seem like we've timed it so the building will fall apart just about the time we all die. And all joking aside, what I think I'm really trying to say is well done. Really well done. It's taken tremendous physical and spiritual work of hauling detritus to dumpsters. I'll never forget driving up to church only to find our treasurer, Margie Eller, waist deep in a dumpster, John handing her item after item to drop in. But also the work of imagining, of envisioning, celebrating 70 years of history and wondering what might be possible in the next 70. A tremendous amount of physical and spiritual work to begin recovering from trapped in the past-itis. And I think this is a very tricky recovery process for congregations in general, because one of the essential roles of a church, a key purpose of religious community, is to maintain a relationship with the past. As the world speeds up around us, as the future blazes towards us at 1 gigabyte per second speeds, preserving a relationship to the past can feel almost a desperate necessity. I hear this soul-level need underlying so much of the conservative conversation in our country. And I think when understood from the vantage point of spiritual suffering, how could it not make sense, this knee-jerk reaction to reject someone else's new culture that seems hell-bent on toppling the past, pulling down statues and changing school names, throwing even something as simple and everyday as pronouns into the fraught landscape of culture wars? We're not really surprised, are we, that we've ended up with a Supreme Court intent on enshrining the God of the old ways in the land of the laws of the land? We're not really surprised at that, are we? We're appalled and we're disturbed, we're angry and we're heartbroken. But this grasping for the past, this hope to reclaim the imagined glory days of times before, isn't it a natural reaction to a world moving too fast by us? A natural reaction that we ourselves can probably relate to. I actually think that this collective memory of glory days of yore is one of the causes of trapped in the past-itis. And it's easy for us now, of course, to pick apart the white supremacy inherent in a slogan like "Make America Great Again." Easy to see the nostalgia of white Americans for another era as a racist grasp at holding on to a culture and a privilege that is slowly, too slowly, being undermined and removed. Usher in that land that has never yet been, as she quoted the words of Langston Hughes, and yet must be. That land that never yet has been and yet must be. Let us make it so, we commit ourselves. Breathe, push, not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb. Easy to see that. But what's perhaps harder for us to see is the way that our own collective memory of glory days of yore keeps us unable to embrace new possibility. One of the hallmarks, I think, of health in a person, in an organization, in a family, in any living system, is intact and simultaneous relationship with the past, the present, and the future. This is a sign of health, if you can hold relationship with past and present and future all at once. If we're overly focused on one of those relationships and have neglected another, it's a sign that something's out of whack. Murray Bowen, who was the pioneering psychiatrist who developed family systems theory, he used the terms fusion and cutoff to describe the two poles of handling anxiety in relationships. Each of us knows, I think, in our extended families, those relationships of fusion where there can be no difference of opinion, where emotions and viewpoints have to stay in lockstep together, or those relationships of cutoff, the years that go by without talking at all, or emotional cutoff, not talking about anything substantial. And so too, I think we can have relationships of fusion or cutoff with the past, the present, or the future. So I've started to wonder about our glory days relationship to a past era as a sort of emotional fusion. And the glory days that loom largest to me and seem to loom large collectively here in the Bay Area, in our wider circles of progressivism, and specifically here in our congregation, when records show a congregation 2 or 3 times the size of our today. The glory days that I think loom large in our collective imagination that Milton has summoned for us beautifully on the piano this morning are the 60s and the 70s. Right, this bygone era. There were treasures unearthed in the scouring process last spring. Treasures like the mysterious airplane strut that is right below us. You are sitting above an airplane strut. Somehow, sometime between 1964, when this building was built, and now, someone put an airplane strut, the bones of a wing, the bones of a wing of a small airplane in the dirt room, for some reason, right below us. Treasures like the original plans for this building, a multi-tiered space-age campus to match the Civic Center over the next hill. Treasures like a binder that Dick Park handed me, sermons by Karel Botermans from 1963 to 1966. So here's what got me excited. Karel Botermans, he served right here at the same time that my grandfather was serving down the road as minister to the First Presbyterian Church of San Anselmo. Both tall Dutch figures, both beloved and towering presences in the pulpit, from all I've heard, both highly concerned with religion's ability to impact social change. You might understand why I'm fascinated with these men. And I haven't found a record of it yet, but I have to imagine that they at least met. Both responded to Dr. King's call to Selma in 1965. Perhaps they even traveled on the same bus out. So here I am poring over the treasured binder and the banker's box I have of my grandfather's sermons. And to be honest, the thing that got me excited to go hunting was to try to read between the lines of how these men were talking about the revolution in gender and sexuality that they were living through. I knew there must be interesting dots to connect between what I know of their personal lives and the movement for sexual liberation and our moment now, the reckoning we're doing with the issues of power and consent that were largely left buried at that time. And all of that is fascinating, and it's worth talking about another time, but that was not the naked emperor that I found. What I found instead was a profound wrestling with the questions of citizenship, with faith and country, with Christianity and communism, with war and moral complicity. Deep contemplations on citizenship in the midst of a moment of tremendous social unrest. I found passages that struck me in the continued relevance of their insight, like this from a sermon by Botermans. He preached right here in 1966, the height of the free speech movement, the anti-war Vietnam War movement. It was a call to action to defend the right to protest. It was called, "What is Treason?" Here's the passage that struck me. What worries me is that the weapon of fear is being used to force our citizens to conform with the actions and opinions of our government. And fear among the people to protest or speak their mind is worse than having a dictator. For a dictator, you can at least shoot or capture, but fear you cannot shoot or capture. Fear is a contagious power which is hidden and subtle, which reinforces itself among the people and which can hide behind any reasonable front, but which is yet highly effective in keeping citizens of a country in line, whatever that line may be, even if it is criminal. It is this fear which swept the country during the McCarthy era. It is this fear, he said, which may sweep the country again unless our government and we ourselves protect the right to protest, as well as encourage the right to protest, even if we do not agree with the cause or the reason of that protest. The right to protest without fear of retaliation or ridicule or loss of jobs is our only safeguard to freedom and democracy, and those who attack this right from within are as strongly to be resisted as those who would attack this from the outside. Both are enemies of democracy, but the ones who attack it from within, he said, are worse, for they hide under a cloak of patriotism and American-sounding phrases, and are therefore a little harder to detect. Traitors of democracy and freedom, as real as a communist who would overthrow our government, for these people attack the very foundation on which our democracy and freedom is built. Over and over I found lines, typewritten lines, and I am grateful that I am not using a typewriter to make my sermons, but typewritten lines that could have been written for today. And while perhaps the battleground has shifted from the right to protest to the possibility of holding a meaningful public discourse where ideas can be actually exchanged, wrestled with, fear as a central tool of legitimate authority remains, of illegitimate authority. Fear, it can hold us captive. We know it can serve to divide people, chill our ability to act to make a difference. But I've started wondering if fear also held in holy relationship to the past, present, and future. Fear held in close with faith can be a generative source, a call to creativity. I think it's that creative response to fear that we were all laughing about last week, about white flower and wife power. It's the creative response that my grandfather found in Jesus' life. So thinking about these ideas of fear and citizenship, about illegitimate authority and a love of country rooted in love of something deeper. A love of country rooted in love of the holy, a love of humanity. Thinking about a Supreme Court that seems to be struggling with the concept of separation of church and state. I got to thinking with all these thoughts about one of those Jesus stories. It's from a moment when that revolutionary rabbi is gaining power and influence, and so some of those who oppose him have come to try and trick him. They come and they ask if they should pay the tax which the empire has levied to build temples to the emperor god Augustus. A tax rooted in illegitimate authority. And I think about the horrific images and Botermans' sermons preached about the Vietnam War, his indictment of his own and his congregation's complicity in that war with their tax dollars. I think of the horrific actions of our government still today, of all the death and destruction, the drone strikes fueled by the taxes we pay. And so these men, they came to Jesus and they asked if they should pay the tax. They tried to put him in the bind. They said, because if he said no to them, you shouldn't pay the tax, he would be arrested on the spot, imprisoned for treason. But if he said yes, he would lose the legitimacy of his own moral, spiritual authority with those who followed him. So they come with the question. But in the story, Jesus is not trapped. He doesn't get trapped by the choice of cutoff or fusion that they present. He asks them to show the coins that they would use to pay the tax, to name whose face it was emblazoned on those coins, Caesar's, of course. And then Jesus famously and confoundingly declares, "Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." We'll get into unpacking this one more another time. I know this is getting long already, but this declaration, interpreted in myriad ways to serve myriad purposes, I lift it up to invoke the capacity we all have to respond to those either-or choices, to black and white thinking, to the flattening and diminishing of public discourse with a creative, generative, playful spirit. To choose neither cutoff nor fusion, to transcend the flight or fight choices and instead hold our fear in close with our faith, to remember there's an airplane strut right below your feet, and we don't know why it's there. That someone could imagine expanding parkland in a city, and that decades later it's becoming so. That this world is full of mystery and possibility, and that every moment offers us an invitation to choose a new creative path. Remember the wisdom of the midwife. Breathe, she says, then push. May it be so. And amen.